James Broughton, Big Joy. My first exposure to James was working at the Museum of Modern Art, and there was a book called Coming Unbuttoned that we'd just gotten in, and I was the one who put them out, and I faced it out, usually faced the books towards the bookshelf, the spine, but I was really taken by his face and his grimace, and I thought, this guy is something else. So I kind of put it out, and after a few days, I kept walking by it and going, I'm going to find out who this guy is. So I started reading it and immediately felt like, whoa, this person is very on my wavelength. And he felt like kind of cosmic family, if to be too new age about it. But this was validated when I started watching his films. I got some films, and I started a little unicorn religion when I was 8 years old. So this was a long time ago. And it just kind of evolved itself into my own personal little religion. And then I get this film, and James says, I am the unicorn, and the unicorn is me. And I said, uh-oh, this guy needs to be contacted, I think. So working at the Museum of Modern Art has its perks. I walked into the film. I was the manager at the store. And I walked into the film department and I said, hey, we got to contact James Broughton. Do you have his address by any chance? So funny because on the internet today you would just look him up. But back then you had to actually have real people around who knew what somebody's address was. And they had just gotten his address. So they gave it to me. I had no backup plan at all. I was just simply too young to figure out that if they had said, well, why do you need it? I wouldn't have had a response. I just believed that I was going to get that address. They gave it to me. I contacted him, and I sent him my book and CD, which were both called The Future Room. And he is a character kind of in The Future Room, but I didn't tell him that. I figured he'd see it. And he did send me this great postcard back, which I could read to you. That was like the greatest review in the world. I should tell that part too. Basically, in line with his view of kind of personal success over worldly success, I definitely understood and understand that what's great about being an artist is knowing the specifics of your own audience. And, I always like to say I am reaching to the 1%. That's like my mission. I love the 1%. And that's where all the interesting stuff is. So I think that, if more people could focus on the pride of reaching 1% instead of the pride of reaching 99%, the whole world would shift dynamics. But so I would not ever have submitted my album to like a Rolling Stone or something like that, as a lot of people who work in the rock genre would do. I sent mine to James Broughton. And so James sends me this amazing review. And so I've posted it to my wall. It's right in my little recording studio in my bedroom. And I posted that postcard on the wall all these years of his personal review to me. And I thought, what another artist might say, I wish I could get a review like that in some big magazine. To me, that is how I felt about having that review from James. James's work influenced mine largely through validation. I think that I had a very individual path to begin with, and I had on a kind of the be other platform. And I found in James someone who was, well along that path. And that really inspired me to be, say in my early 20s, and to see somebody who was so much more further along the line and who had lived what I considered that exact path. And I think that even over the years, I still think of him as that inspiration because that 99% of the world is always trying to get you to think in their commerce-oriented way, to be a real person and stay authentic. I often think of James in a little quip that he might say, or, I'm good enough friends with him, I just think of him, and he's like, well, this is what I think, and I go, thank you, James. So I have a little conversation with him, when I need to. So I feel that he has been a guide So there's not a specific thing in James's work that I can point to other than, everything that his work is about, which is to have the individual path, to not be part of the herd, to find your own voice, to be other, to be, his statement, to follow your own weird, and always getting the joke of all of that, the laugh at the end of that thing that so many people look and go, oh my God, no one's listening. And it's like, you are listening, and the world is listening, the planet is listening, and the universe is listening. And why is that not who your audience is? I always say, James wrote for the angels. I always think, who's my audience? If I have the angels applauding me when I finish the album and I do a listening party, do I really care if people don't get it? I mean, I enjoy when a few people do, but that really isn't the main thing, because I know that they also love Britney Spears, and they also love, every other mediocrity that's out there, whether it's a film or it's music or it's television. And everyone's expectations are so low. So I feel that if I can do something where I can hear angels laughing, I say, okay, we've done the right thing, And I think that is a Broughton influence. I did not meet James. We corresponded quite a bit. It's funny, we didn't, here again is quality over quantity. I think we have 5 letters. But each time it was very fulfilling. It's like we had, obviously I know more about his work than he would know about mine, so I have the larger affinity there. But every one of them has a little something to it that you can, tell a story about, because it was, like I was saying, that that to me, James's great message is what he wrote to me in our last correspondence. He ended it with, be brave, be bright, be beautiful. And I think of it all the time. I mean, this 6-word thing that he wrote, I always think that summed it up pretty well. If I think maybe you should be angry today, I say no. Be brave, be bright, be beautiful, and rise above, which again is, I think, something that's always there. I think that that's very accurate. Thinking that he is a reveler and a revealer, and that it is his joy that is the source of kind of his immediacy and the understanding of the humor of the galaxy and of godness. But I do think that's probably one of the things why you have someone who really is pretty much a genius, who is in an underappreciated position in the world, because so much of who he's reaching often that he's talking to are other artists, and the artists are a very kind of complaining bunch who are very attached to their why I can't and why I won't and why I don't, especially the why I can't. And James is an I can kind of guy. I mean, it's like Yoko Ono's piece about, you climb this whole ladder, and when you get to the top of the ladder, you take a magnifying glass and you put that magnifying to the glass to the ceiling, and it says yes. And James he's the yes guy, So I think that was a disconnect from so many artists who want to have the baggage and the excuses. Someone who is so very brave and bold to step forward and say, you are the luckiest person alive because you know how to create. You don't have to sit back and just accept the mediocrity being handed to you. You can invent, and you add to the world by what you make. And that's such a gift. How can you dare bring a sense of misery into the incredible gift of possibility that you've been given? And so James is kind of handing that to people and doing it with a laugh. And I think that a lot of people don't know how to validate themselves at that level of depth. So, if that's a problem to have, I too want that problem. James's legacy is that I think he's one of those people who can reach people well after the time that they're here. People like their own mirrors. They like the they don't like the infinite in the way that James was able to present it. And I think when we get to a point where there is a much greater acceptance of not having those excuses and being able to accept joy into your life and be able to share that and get past the excuses and the baggage, that opens the door for somebody like James to be able to speak to people on kind of a wider basis than perhaps we've had up to this point. And the reason that I say that is, again, working at the Museum of Modern Art, where there are so many artists that, and lots of them, not just the Van Goghs and the Frida Kahlos, it happens over and over again that an artist is kind of forced by their muse into a one-on-one conversation. And when that conversation is done and that lifetime is encapsulated, that becomes something that's shared down the line versus to focus on what's happening now. What is happening now is often not so much. That you can hype it all you want, but it's never going to be true that what everyone is talking about that moment is necessarily the thing that in any way will survive 5, 10, 20, or 100 years. That's part of his legacy. I think it was in his spirit from so early on. It would be hard to imagine him not getting there, because if you consider him feeling like when he was 2 that he had the glittering stranger in his bedroom, he's saying pretty early on he had this sense of mystical power and possibility. My unicorn religion at 8, I think I was a little bit behind him. I know it was 8, and I had a very similar experience of something that I felt was entering the room. The unicorn is like known for its invisible quality, that people can't see it unless you believe and trust and all of this kind of business. And I had made up my mind at 8 that if I ever had to be reborn into this world again, I would see to it that in this life I made sure that it was not as stupid as it was when I got here. So when I get out of here, this planet is going to be somehow at a higher place than what I walked into. So I made a vow and a promise that early on. And there was definitely no sway in my life. And I just know that James was the same way. That is really about coming into this world as a being that has enough experience at many different levels, whether you want to consider something maybe beyond Earth, just a cosmic intelligence, that all you're doing in this world is dusting it off and scraping off the little layers of earthhood maybe that are actually in the way of your infinite kind of cosmic understanding, to see yourself as a citizen of the universe, which seems out there, except that it's so obvious and simple that why doesn't everybody see themselves as a citizen of the universe? And James didn't talk a lot about space and aliens, but he did in his own way, because he was so much talking about our place and our place of action as a being in the universe, and really not that focused on Earth. One of the issues in James's life and work that I really enjoy is that there's a line in the movie Tommy, and it says, "If I told you what it took to reach the highest highs, you'd laugh and say nothing's that simple." And that is the doubt that a James Broughton is basically up against, because he understands that it is about actually the very simple things and how complex those simplicities are. The world's need to believe it's more complicated than that, so that they don't have to rise up to the really simple responsibilities of just your own goodness and knowing who you are. What's more simple than just knowing who you are and saying, I love you and I accept the world as it is, and then to promote your own ability to rise to the responsibility to create and give back to this energy that brings you into the world. That's pretty simple, but nobody can do it. So a James Broughton who magic can do it over and over again and make it seem that he is light. And he's light. But people's interpretation, because they're from the lower, is they think that's lightweight. But so I always think of that Tommy line with him, because it's like, man, that says quite a bit. Dreamwood, of course, is James's kind of darkest work in terms of really using blending images of other worlds. He's basically using the earth as self because the world is the unconscious. And he was, in fact, shoveling into the earth and inserting his phallus at one moment. And it was very much a union of body and world, but also the conscious and the unconscious. He could have called it Dream Woody. I had brought James's film Dreamwood with me to Maine. It was a longer film, and it was very much about the woods and what I call the wilderness of consciousness. And so I brought it with me to Maine. And I woke up one morning at 5 a.m, wide awake, as though it was 2 p.m. And there was no question I was not going to go back to sleep. So I kind of crept out of the house and walked down to the water, and I was like, am I going to take a boat out? I said, sure, I'll take the boat. So I start canoeing out toward the sunrise, and I stop the boat as I get to the center of the lake, and I'm looking at the sun, and I turn around toward the house, and there's the moon, equidistant. And I am in the center of the sun and the moon. And I thought, oh my God, I brought James's film. So it was another connection between us. It was so specific to my life and what I was living and that which he had created. So I sent him another letter about this moment, and I sent him some fudge from North Conway, because it's the greatest fudge in the world. And he sent me this thing. Thank you for the divinity of your fudge and for your Dreamwood illuminations. And I loved it. And he sent me this poem, This Is It, which, kind of summed it up. It's like, yep, there you are. There's the moment happening. You're in it. One thing, though. That unicorn has never pointed so far up as it does today. He said, I hope you're keeping your unicorn in good working order. Instead of seeking recognition, James was saying, recognize you. Recognize the true you. That is not something that can be given to you by everybody else. The recognition that you need for your art is to be able to be honest and to be open. And so that is truly to recognition of the self. By being yourself, you do reach out to everybody around you. So it's not a selfish path. It is recognizing, once again, the all in everybody.
So could you just do that a couple times? Follow your own weird.
Follow your own weird. Follow your own weird. Follow your own weird. James really wasn't that weird. That's the thing. Everybody else is weird. I mean, the world is so weird that for me, James made sense. But it is following a sense of the kooky and the irrational and the absurd, and understanding how much magic is there, because human beings are always following their own consciousness. So that's what makes sense to them. But the world is much bigger than the things that we imagine. So the magic is actually in what we don't expect, what we haven't determined, because we're always looking here at what we're constructing, and then there's all these things that always show us a larger world. And so that was his trick, to make you look outside of the tiny world you live in, so that you can see, I didn't expect that. Oh, my world is so much bigger now. I think that was for him, weird was as much a tool as a way of life. James is a prophet of everything that distraction culture is terrified of. They're terrified of the personal touch, the personal vision. They're terrified of personhood. And James is saying, notice the small things, the intimate things. Well, the small things and the intimate things don't make you money. So the world's cultural religion of following the dollar, that is what has value because there's a price, he's saying the value's right here. And distraction culture is all about making sure that you don't listen to what's in here, so that you can pay attention to this Mickey Mouse thing that's out here that has just absolutely nothing but just air. And he was very threatening for that reason. James uses words a lot in his film, but what he's talking about is so often kind of a surrealist, poetic vision that one wonders if the right way to honor him at some level is not kind of a smattering of sensations, because that's James's world for me. When I think of him, I think of somebody who can pull energies and can play with energies and can shapeshift energies. And I think that's who he is. There are all kinds of ways to evaluate what an artist's value is. And one person might say, how important do you think that James Broughton is? But a more interesting question is, to whom was James Broughton important? Because the answer is some very cool people. I mean, that's what you want, I can only answer that question from my own vantage point of feeling that is not so important as I think it was at a certain time. The direction of this generation is to get past saying, this is my background, I'm gay. And while I don't think it's necessarily great to only highlight what is the same, I think what we want to actually concentrate is enjoying our difference, but I don't think our difference is because we are gay, or we are black, or we are Latino. I think that we are different because we are. And that diversity is the beauty of the universe. And think what good it would do for the world if we were focused on embracing and appreciating and having a sense of humor about perhaps our differences rather than creating wars about our differences. I mean, if you've got 12 astrological signs that are all complete entities unto themselves that are very different in character, well, then they are not all supposed to be the same. What is beautiful is to see them all in concert together. When you go to see an incredible show, everyone isn't playing all the same notes. We're all playing different notes. And that is the music of the cosmos. That's where we want to get people. But, hey, I'm pretty glad that James was gay. I probably wouldn't be as entirely connected to him if he did not have same-sex relationships and love and intimacy in a way that I also experience. So at a personal level, I can definitely appreciate it. At a group level, I don't think it's that important. I think that any of us who deal with the concepts of magic, say a Wiccan perspective, which does not necessarily involve witchcraft as much as it involves, mental energies and reconciling forces, recognizes that there was a lie created, a long time ago to control people so that they would think their body was dirty. And that what we who believe in the spirit of things know is that this is also one of our tools, not just this, but all of it. And that you want to be turned on by the universe and by yourself and by other people. And part of your power is in your body. And this notion that sex is dirty or your body's dirty, it's pretty difficult to feel like a powerful individual when the vehicle you use in this world you're supposed to believe is dirty and bad and sinful. So if you were a religion that was more concerned with social control and making sure that people didn't get any ideas in their head about themselves having personal power to enjoy and be, but you wanted them to bow down before some other force that would make sure they were subservient, you'd probably say that sex is dirty and sinful and you shouldn't enjoy touch. Because this is your vehicle. If you're always shutting your light down, you're pretty impotent. And that's just the way they want you. But that's not the way that we roll around here. He's definitely unabashed about the topic, and I certainly appreciate his candor. But, I think there are probably other people who are... Anna Eastnin is a very good example of someone who uses personal sexual confidence as a way of interpreting life in the universe in a way that I think James could very much appreciate, and I'm sure she did appreciate in him as well. James is an artist who transcends his art forms. He is the biggest art form in his catalog. I think he's quite a filmmaker, especially when you consider the time and what people's perceptions of what is film and how do you use it. he's breaking through a lot of walls that maybe 20, 30 years later, people think, oh, well, those walls have always been knocked down. Well, they haven't. They weren't always knocked down. His poetry is absolutely fantastic. Certainly, you get as much content per line with James Broughton than you can get from any poet. And I go up to Shakespeare to say that. Per line, you are getting an enormous amount of information. But James is his own highest art form, because if you read his prose or you read his poetry, all of that still points back to, this is my spirit, this is my approach, let's luxuriate. And so you kind of give that guy the credit more than you give the art. I think, again, the art is a tool, and I think he used it very well. But if you said, can I have James or his poems or his films, I would take James. So I will now read, This is it. This is it. And I am it. And you are it. And so is that. And he is it. And she is it. And it is it. And that is that. Oh, it is this. And it is thus. And it is them and it is us. It is now. And here it is. And here we are. So this is it. James Broughton was a permission giver. James Broughton was a revealer and a reveler. James Broughton was a call to action, a call to the self. James Broughton was a trickster. James Broughton was a magician. James Broughton was now. James Broughton was really a call to personal freedom at the intimate level that requires. You don't get personal freedom from everybody else. You get personal freedom from yourself. And it's a permission that very few people give themselves. And James gave it to himself, and he knew he couldn't give it to somebody else, but he could give you your own opportunity to recognize that here I am, and there you can be. And that is that. There you go. Look at that. Oh, she's pretty. Come here.